Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to our reading of Bonfire. So, we are now on to chapter 2 of our story, and we are waiting to see what Major John McCrae is going to decide with his horse. Okay, so we were left off with some suspense. All right, so chapter 2 of Bonfire, the Chestnut Gentleman. Dodge began to brush me vigorously with a stiff bristled brush which felt positively heavenly, but caused my lips to twitch in that embarrassing, involuntary, and undignified way. Thorn noticed and sneered at me with a sidelong, squinty-eyed dagger of a look. Then Dodge moved to my rump. Oh dear, he shook his head. Look at the backs of your socks. I'll need to wash those. My rear white socks had gotten stained with the green manure in the crowded rail car. Back in a moment, lads. You behave yourselves, he said sternly. I need some water. And then to himself he muttered quietly, they should be all right for a couple of minutes. I wasn't so sure. I looked at Thor and tried to gauge his mood. Dodge picked up a tin bucket and disappeared from sight. No sooner had he gone than Thor, on my left, began to pull on his halter shank and swing his rear end to the left. He managed to turn himself so that his front end was almost facing me, and like lightning, he raised his right leg and struck down hard with his hoof, glancing down my upper left leg with an excruciating blow. There was nothing I could do but pull back as hard as I could to get away from him. My lead shank stretched and snapped, and I got myself out of there, away from him. And by the time that Dodge returned moments later, I was 50 feet away. I stood and trembled with the pain, and Dodge dropped the bucket and came running. Oh, goodness, could I not turn my back? Darn it, you've broken your lead and halter too. The Major will be furious. Dodge grabbed another shank and strode angrily towards me. And we thought that you were the quiet one. And then, from my side, he saw the rivulets of blood run down and pool on the ground. His face fell. Oh, no! He came around and saw the wound. He slowly turned, and I could feel his anger. He stared back at Thor, who was nonchalantly munching hay from the manger. I swear, if I had a loaded gun right now. Dodge tied me to a tree, ran and got the bucket with what remained of the water, and he grabbed some field dressings from his own kit. He then tried to stop the bleeding with compression, and when the young Lieutenant Lex Helmer appeared in the distance, Dodge hollered, Lieutenant Helmer! Lieutenant! Lex heard him and came running. He saw my leg. What in the world? A flap of skin about 8 inches long had been peeled back from the blow and hung off my leg, dripping a steady stream of blood. Dodge said, I only went for a bucket of water and Thor must have kicked him. Struck him with the front foot. Can you please get the Major? He needs treatment, probably stitches, and the sooner the better before the flies get at it. Moments later, the Major appeared with Lex. He had the copper box and strode up to Dodge and me. Dodge hung his head. I'm so sorry, Major. I'm so sorry. I only get water to wash his socks, and Thor must have. The Major interrupted him tersely. Never mind, Dodge. Never mind. Just go and get more water. Clean water. Go. The Major quickly took off his tunic and spread it out on the ground. Then he knelt and started taking things out of the copper box and laying them out on the tunic. He got out thread for stitching and a huge needle, bandages, a bottle of antiseptic, and scissors. He stood and spoke to me. Well, Bonfire, that's a fine welcome. I was going to ride you tomorrow. I don't know if you'll be fit to ride for anyone now. Doubtful. At least not before our departure date, if at all. He sighed heavily. My heart sank as he began to soak up the blood with the field dressing. Bonfire, fox hunter extraordinaire, would have no chance to prove himself. Washed up before he even got started. Lex went to the tent and studied Thor. He knelt and looked at the front right hoof. It was clearly blood-stained. Lex stood up at the horse. "Oh, you're a devil," he said. "Not fit for anyone or any job in this army, I don't think." Dodge reappeared with a full bucket of water. The major washed the wound and then liberally dabbed antiseptic on it, which stung sharply and made my eyes water. Then Dodge held me while the major stitched. He cut off the torn flap of skin with scissors because it would only shrivel and die without blood supply. Several stitches later, I was patched up. The major started to lead me back to my tent, but stopped. "Private Dodge, get that animal out of my sight." "Yes, sir," Dodge said quickly, and undid Thor's lead shank and backed him out of the tent. "Where will I take them, sir?" "Over the cliff into the river sounds like the obvious choice." Dodge studied the major's face. Was he serious? The major smiled weakly and sighed. "Just tie him up outside. Outside, away from the other horses from now on. Is that clear, Dodge?" "Yes, sir." Dodge led Thor away, annoyed and muttering under his breath. "You'd be a fine animal in every way, but fit for no man with that nasty temperament, fit for no man at all." If a horse could smile, Thor smiled as Dodge led him away. He had badly injured the interloper and perhaps gotten out of a hard day's riding after a church parade as well. The major led me to my spot and gave me a big scoop of oats, which I appreciated very much. These soldiers did not yet know about the legendary Bonfire appetite. The major examined the wound at length and talked to me the whole time. He apologized and said he'd do his best to make it right. He stayed with me until the dark started to descend. "Well, I'm off to bed, Bonfire. I hope your leg is improved by morning, but I doubt if it will be." He patted me on the neck, and as he walked away, he said quietly to himself, "I'll be afraid to look tomorrow." I didn't sleep well at all. My leg throbbed with pain, and in the morning it had swollen and it was hot and ached with the beginning of infection, probably from Thor's filthy hoof. The major came out first thing, with Private Dodge trailing behind him, and had a look at it. "Oh, dear, what a mess." He looked into my eyes and held my head in his hands. "We'll do our best, Bonfire, won't we, Dodge?" "We will, sir," said Dodge forlornly. But the major spun around with purpose and spoke. "Now, Private Dodge, saddle up that bay. I'll take him for the ride of his life after church parade. Never mind raising his leg to strike. He won't have energy to raise his head when I'm through with him." Dodge didn't conceal his surprise and started to open his mouth, but the major put up his hand. "Thor is my original horse and the horse I've been given. I'll have to give it my best effort before I rule him out, especially now the Bonfire's been injured. Believe me, Dodge, I don't like it either, and I'm dreading to have to tell Todd what has happened to his gift." The major walked away, but then stopped and turned around, thoughtfully stroking his chin. "Major?" said Dodge. "We've got 1 week before we sail. What about that magic horse elixir of yours? Your old sergeant's mixture?" "Oh, yes." Dodge clapped his hand to his forehead as he remembered. "Sergeant Major's Fraser's magic horse liniment?" Dodge had served with Fraser in the Boer War. "That concoction, whatever it is, I know you swear by it, so slather it on, it can't hurt. Slather it on and pray for a miracle. For both of us. I don't want to be stuck with that miserable bay, and I don't doubt you do either." "No, sir, I certainly do not." The major walked away, and Dodge rummaged in the tack trunk and came out with a clear quart bottle, 3/4 full of honey-colored oil. He knelt down beside me with a clean cloth and poured a hefty dollop on it. I squinted and braced for a sting, but it didn't hurt at all. I bent my head down and smelled it. Not too bad. Unusual, but not an unpleasant smell. "Don't fuss with it, you," Dodge said to me. "It'll be just the thing to get this healing. The major is of a scientific mind and has always been skeptical of these home remedies. He must be desperate. And to resort to this, he must really want you, Master Bonfire. Let us pray for success." Dodge slathered it on and covered it with a fresh bandage. I have to say, the pain seemed to diminish like magic. Or was it my imagination? I was desperate to take the place of that bay hellion. I had no idea what was in store, but I felt it wouldn't matter as long as I was with the major. Dodge held me on a long shank outside and let me graze wherever I liked for a couple of hours. While we were out there, the Major thundered past on Thor, who was really starting to sweat. They came around twice more in the next hour, and the last time, Thor had foam on his neck and was sopping wet. Later, the Major returned, leading Thor, who was soaking wet from nose to tail. His sides heaved and his head hung down to his hooves. He was exhausted. The Major walked up to Dodge. Untack him and walk him until he's dry. Water him once his breathing's back to normal. I don't know if that did any good, but he seems to have lost most of that cockiness for now anyway. Dodge nodded worriedly towards me. You don't want him back in with? Oh, definitely not. He's lost that privilege. Dodge took Thor's saddle off and bridle and put a halter on him, and then they went off walking. Perhaps I'm soft, but I did feel a little sorry for that knackered bay horse. He had not even the strength or the will to give me a dirty look as they walked by. My day felt better and better as the day went on, and when evening came, I had a great sleep. And first thing the next day, the Major and Dodge walked up and led me out of the tent. Dodge held me, and the Major removed the bandage. For the first time, I noticed his breathing. I could hear it, a rasping sound that crackled and squeaked in his chest. He knelt beside my leg. Well, I'll be darned. It's noticeably better. He put the flat of his hand over the wound without touching it. Very little heat. Smells okay, too, as he bent down and sniffed my leg. I believe the infection is almost gone. Amazing. He stood and smiled broadly. And Dodge shrugged, resisting the urge to say, I told you so. Right. Get him walking. Walk him all around the place. Not too fast, but let's get his blood circulating, and that will help speed up the healing. I might be taking him across the pond after all. Keep putting that stuff on. Just keep it up. Will do, sir, said Dodge. The Major's smile warmed my heart and made me feel hopeful. Across the pond. What pond, I wondered. Bring him over to me after lunch. I'll check his leg again, and then you can tie him up outside the examination tent for a change. I'll walk him back when I'm finished for the day. I've been going to hammer and tongs with these new recruits. I've put through 20 through yesterday myself. Only had to turn 3 away. One clinically blind. I don't know what he was thinking. A blind gunner? Both the Major and Dodge laughed, and the laughter made the Major cough. There was a fellow from Montreal who had the beginnings of tuberculosis, and the third, from out west, Montana, had some other kind of chest problem. Like your asthma, sir? Dodge looked suddenly uncomfortable, like he'd misspoken. The Major looked at him, pausing before he spoke. No, not asthma. Perhaps emphysema. He was a very heavy smoker, yellow fingers, yellow mustache, dreadful breath. Not asthma, anyway. Well, he brushed off his knees again. I'm off, and I'll see you two after lunch. After the Major had gone, Dodge led me slowly through the camp for the first time. I was stiff at first, but the further we went, the more limber my leg felt. It was anything but boring, I can tell you. Such activity! Hundreds of men and horses, all sorts of drills taking place. Groups of men ran past as part of fitness training. Other groups did jumping jacks or ran hollering at swinging bags of straw with bayonets, trying to stab them with various degrees of accuracy. As we walked behind a shooting range where men lay on the ground and shot their rifles at distant targets, there was a lot of yelling and cursing from the drill sergeant in charge. We walked past a huge corral where several men were working with green horses. All sorts of bucking and bolting and rearing going on. Wild things altogether. What a display! I saw a horse rear up and fall right over backwards on his rider, who managed to throw himself sideways just in time to miss being crushed. We passed a small sea of white tents, white bell tents, perhaps 200 of them in neat rows. Beside my stall, the Major slept in one of his own, just like the common recruits. By the time we'd walked for an hour, my leg felt almost as good as new, as if it hadn't been injured at all. We came up on a gathering of army chaplains. Just then, the imposing minister of the militia, Sam Hughes, on his own horse. He was a big man with an iron jaw, bushy black eyebrows, and fierce eyes. He dismounted and spoke to the chaplains. Dodge backed me into a thicket of bushes, out of the minister's line of view, but we could still hear everything. Men, you have a very important role in the Canadian Expeditionary Force, and that is to keep the morale high and to be a light for those soldiers, to hold up the light of God and to keep these men on the straight and narrow. God is on our side in this fight, and you must remind the men of this, and at every opportunity, especially whenever you see doubt. Minister Hughes was very red in the face and emphatic. The chaplains looked at each other with sidelong glances and subtle questioning looks. One of them in the front row raised his hand and spoke. Sir? Minister Hughes walked up to him and squinted at his badge. Question Chaplain Bridgewater. The minister boomed, saliva spraying out over the chaplain. Yes, sir, Chaplain Bridgewater blinked, as though facing a strong wind. Will we be allowed to carry handguns, sidearms? He asked. Sir? You will not! Not at all, the minister roared, and then he narrowed his eyes and leaned in confidentially and said quietly, But do I suggest you each carry a bottle of castor oil? Yes, sir, Chaplain Bridgewater said. The chaplains looked at each other again as Minister Hughes got up on his horse again and rode away. Castor oil, you say? Said Bridgewater as the minister rode out of earshot, and then several of the chaplains fell about, laughing uproariously. I thought to myself, I'm afraid the minister might be a couple of hay bales short of a wagon load. Dodge led me away, chuckling to himself. It occurred to me suddenly that all this leading up to a war must be leading up to a war somewhere. The minister had said, God is on our side in this fight. A fight across the pond? Some day the major and I would be indebted to the eccentric minister of the militia, but that would be later, after the great battle. All of these things were interesting and thought-provoking, and though worrying, but the most amazing thing we saw was the veterinary officer, Captain Colburn, and his mascot, a baby black bear named Winnie. I couldn't believe my eyes. The little bear stood up on her hind legs, just like a human. Valcartier was full of surprises. Now this is something I want to show you guys. There's the picture. I really like that picture. Okay. We came up a soft dirt path towards a group of big rectangular white tents. There was the major with a pipe in his mouth at a table outside, filling out and signing forms. He looked up and saw us, and his face lit up. He set down his pipe in an ashtray. Attestation papers by the bushel. Almost 15,000 soldiers attested so far, Dodge, pledging their military services to king and empire. All to be signed, stamped, and dated. The medical exam is the least of it. He sighed and then stamped several papers with a little oval stamp that said 1st Brigade Canadian Field Artillery. Stamp, stamp, stamp. There, that's enough for now, until after lunch. Leave Bonfire here with me and you can go, Dodge. I'll bring him back before dinner. Off you go. Have a look at Thor's hind right, will you? It seemed as if he might be on the verge of losing that shoe after yesterday. Dodge led me to a horse line a few feet away and tied me by my lead shank to it. I didn't even want to hear the name Thor. It reminded me that although my leg seemed to be healing, it wasn't healed yet. My position was still not certain. A wave of fear passed through me. The major stood up and put on his tunic. He knocked the stinky contents of his pipe into the ashtray and put the pipe in his pocket. Then he picked up the copper box from another table and came to where I was tied. He set the box down and knelt beside me, removing the bandage. It's looking good, Bonfire. Excellent progress. He replaced the bandage and stood up. If this continues, I'm going to ride you on Friday. Not far, not hard, just a little test, okay? He looked right in my face and gave my forehead a scratch. Come on, we'll go for a stroll. The major took a sandwich out of his bag, and we walked away from the tents toward the river. After he finished it, he stopped and fished an apple out of his tunic. Where are my manners? He took one bite of the apple and fed the rest to me. It was a very welcome treat. We walked down to the Jacques Cartier River, and I had a long, delicious drink out of it. As we walked, the Major sang a song that sounded very cheery, despite the dire words. The minstrel boy to the war has gone. In the ranks of death you'll find him. His beautiful deep voice was precisely on key, for which I was grateful. Dr. Thomas, our veterinarian, used to sing or whistle continuously, and not on key at all. Never. Not even close. It was positively painful to hear. We walked by a group of young soldiers wrestling, practicing for hand-to-hand combat, I supposed. "You're dead!" hollered one. "Nah, you're dead!" shouted the other. They seemed to be having more fun than anything, and two who were wrestling collapsed with laughter. The Major became thoughtful and serious, watching them. He turned to me and stroked my neck. "They don't know about war, Bonfire. No idea what they're in for. They think this camp is summer camp, and war will be more of the same." We returned to the medical tents, and the Major tied me up again until late afternoon. While he was examining soldiers, the other senior officer came by, the Surgeon General Carleton Jones. He walked up to me and looked me over. Then he opened my mouth, the nerve, and looked at my teeth. He was a very officious character with a snotty manner, and I didn't like him one bit. The Major appeared. "Can I help you, Jones?" he asked, his face tight with disdain. For the first time, I saw that the kind manner I was getting used to in the Major could completely disappear. These two men did not like each other at all. "General to you, Jones to you, Dr. McCrae. This must be the horse Todd gave you. Quite nice." "Yes, and that's Major McCrae. Now, what can I do for you?" the Major asked very formally. "I just came by to see how you were doing with the exams," which was false. I could tell he was angling to tell him something quite unrelated to that. "I have to tell you, Major, that medicals are not supposed to have horses. You must know that." "But I am not in the medical corps. You must know that. I am in the 1st Brigade Canadian Field Artillery and have not been assigned to that happy band to the medical corps. As second in command of the 1st Brigade Canadian Field Artillery," he repeated, "I am not only allowed to have a mount, it's a requirement. Sir William said you were the finest physician of your generation. What could you have been thinking?" Jones' eyes narrowed, and he spat out the words, "A highly qualified doctor wasting his time in the artillery?" The Surgeon General stood there and seethed for a moment. "We'll be covering this ground again, Major." Jones had referred to Sir William Osler, the famous pioneer of modern medicine, the Major's friend and mentor. "Do excuse me, General," said the Major. "I have many men to attend to yet today. Goodbye." And with that, he turned his back on the man and returned to the examination tent. Standing and watching in the door of the tent was a slim young captain with tattoos on his forearm, his cap at a rakish angle, and a mischievous glint in his eye. I'd seen him the other day when I was given to the Major. "Cosgrave, you brat! When did you sneak in here?" The two men shook hands vigorously. "You didn't witness that exchange, did you?" "No, but I saw him heading this way and I followed him over. He looked like he was on a mission. What did he say?" "Just some tripe about medical officers not being allowed mounts. He can't just get over the fact that I've chosen the artillery over the Army Medical Corps." Another voice chimed in. It was the portly, bow-legged Colonel Morrison. "The feud goes somewhat deeper than whether or not medicals get horses. It goes all the way back to South Africa and that other war. Before your time, laddie," the Colonel said to Captain Cosgrave. "And that is a very long story that I shall tell you someday over a bottle of scotch, but not today." The men laughed, and the Colonel wrinkled his nose. "Speaking of Boers, Major, what in the world are you smoking in that pipe? It smells like that awful Boer tobacco." It's a blend called Old Chum. Quite nice, actually. Old Barnyard, more like, said the colonel, and the men laughed, including the major. Say, what did you ever do with your profanity notebook? Do you still have that thing? The major said nothing, but shook his finger at the colonel. All the men raised their eyebrows, their curiosity piqued at this. The colonel said he used to keep a little notebook of the, how shall I put it, of the more colorful expressions of the common, and I do mean common, scintillations of genius from the Canadian artillerymen in the field. The men snickered. Some of those men of ours are amazingly invented with their barrages of blasphemy. Eh, Major? Captain Cosgrave let loose a guffaw, slapping his knee. That's a good one, Colonel. Barrage of blasphemy. The major snorted and laughed. I believe Mother put it on the burn pile at the farm. She did not, did she? There were some gems in there, said the colonel with pretend distress. I liked the feeling between these men. Good humor, a warm and easy friendship, and respect. Listen, Jack, we need to assess these horses tomorrow. How's his leg? The colonel walked over and looked. Looks good, but maybe not ready for riding. What do you think? Jack. So that was the major's name. Jack was much too familiar a title for me to use, but I liked the sound of it. I think we'll see how he is tomorrow. One more night should bring him along to where I can ride him. I'm pretty sure that he'll be ready tomorrow, although I'm not going to push him too hard. I'll start with him, and then I'll take a turn in the bay, and then I'll make my decision. Fine, said the colonel. I'll be at your tent at 10 a.m. My stomach turned to jelly. Bonfire, fox hunter extraordinaire, probably had one chance, and one chance only, to convince these men that he was good enough for the major. And I was still up against that demon Thor. I resolved to do my utmost, even if I was in pain. I would not show it. Nothing was going to stop me from convincing the major to choose me as his charger. After another slathering of the special elixir, Dodge put me to bed in the tent stable. I didn't sleep well with the worrying. Finally, I dozed off, but not until well into the small hours. And that is the end of chapter 2. So, ladies and gentlemen, a couple of things I would like to mention about this chapter, which I think are very interesting, are the bear that was named Winnie. Guess who that was? That bear, her name was Winnipeg, named after the regiment, the location where her regiment was from. And she became the inspiration for Winnie the Pooh. So Winnie did actually end up going overseas to England, and she could not end up going into battle with the soldiers who she had was with, who rescued her, as she had been abandoned as a baby. And so she wound up making a life for herself at the London Zoo, and where the author, A.A. Milne, discovered the bear, and his son, Christopher Robin, fell in love with the bear. And so Winnie the Pooh was born. So that's the neat how Bonfire and Winnie the Pooh had met in the story. Another really interesting thing as well is that the song, How the Minstrel Boy to the War Has Gone, that particular song is actually a song that was sung. I grew up with my dad singing that song, and he learned that song from his dad, who probably learned it from his dad, who was a World War I vet. And that song also probably was sung in World War II as well. So that is actually a song, and how I sang it was to the tune that my dad and my grandfather would sing that song to. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed today's reading of Bonfire, and stay tuned with us for Chapter 3. All right, so have a good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bye.